Hello and welcome to another episode of the It's Not About the Fucking Food podcast. My name is Chloe and today we're going to be talking about exercise in recovery. And I think it's really important to talk about this because our mindset around movement and how much we move is going to impact our ability to have a really successful and sustainable recovery. And I think so often we kind of miss a part of when we're not looking at the root cause work, when we don't understand the physiology of restriction, disordered eating, movement, and it makes us really prone to relapse. It means that our eating disorder kind of has the space to kind of morph, especially if we haven't done that raw root cause work. And quite often we see people who start exercising, then start restricting when it becomes not enough, or equally start restricting and then have this compulsive exercise come along when the control around food isn't really enough to kind of meet their needs and keep that kind of anxiety under control. And this physiological process, I think, is really, really key. Now, I talked about some of this in season 2, episode 1, where I think the podcast is called Should I Eat Breakfast If I'm Not Hungry? So definitely check that out if you want to learn more about feast-famine theory. But basically, we evolved from hunter-gatherers. We evolved from hunter-gatherers that had limited supply of food around us. We didn't have fridges, freezers, supermarkets. We had to hunt and gather our food. And so if we went through a period of famine where there isn't food in our local environment, we would have to migrate, hence migratory theory. We'd have to migrate to a new place where hopefully there would be more food. And there's some adaptations that we've evolved to have to support us with that migration. Some of those being shutting down our sort of digestive systems, which can be a cause of IBS that I see in people who restrict and have kind of some exercise compulsion in there as well. We also experience higher levels of adrenaline and cortisol, and therefore feeling restless, agitated, unable to sit still, unable to be present and focus, because that adrenaline and cortisol is meant to be able to keep us moving, to keep us migrating, even if we are underfueled. It's to give us that extra burst of energy, to push us to really feel that fear, because our body feels in fear. It's like we haven't got enough here, we need to keep moving, hence that adrenaline cortisol level comes back and comes up. And also why we feel so anxious, agitated, and often snappy and just a bit irritable, because we're really dysregulated. Actually, we're experiencing this flood of stress hormones that make us feel really stressed. Our body is feeling stressed because it feels like it's under threat. And so that physiology is really important for us to understand. There's also some mental hunger that can often come in with that. So fantasizing about food, clock watching to your next meal, that again is to keep us moving. If we fantasize about the next meal, then that's motivation for us to keep migrating, even when we're tired, even when we were hungry, as these hunter-gatherers. And so this is partly why when we start restricting, why we can get that anxiety really creep in massively, and also why that exercise compulsion can sometimes be like an add-on that becomes actually a really integral part of our disordered eating. And it becomes even more complex and more ingrained with that when we look at the fact that when we exercise, we remove some of those stress hormones, we release some of that adrenaline, we release the energy that has kind of given us, and we kind of increase the dopamine, serotonin levels as a result of the exercise as well. So then we start to build this association with the fact that we exercise and then we feel calm, we then feel less anxious, we feel more in control. And kind of fulfills that cycle then, because we are exercising more and therefore more in a calorie deficit than we were. So we release more stress hormones, which then means we restrict, more likely to feel in control. Then we exercise more because we're feeling more agitated, because that adrenaline cortisol levels keep rising in response to restriction. And so off the cycle we go. And the really key thing to remember is that the exercise isn't the solution here, much in the same way that restriction isn't a way to feel in control. It's a short-term solution. And with most of our unhealthy coping mechanisms, or the coping mechanisms that are kind of our default behaviours through our, eating disorders, anxiety, whatever, they have that short-term payoff. For a little while, we'll feel a little bit more like calm, less anxious, etc., until, that time when that cortisol builds again, or until the next meal, until the next thing, until the next, time we have to get clothes on or whatever, the anxiety will raises again, right? So, and there'll be key points depending on how your eating disorder or disordered eating manifests, whether that looks like the next mealtime or the next time you've got to choose what to wear, as to what's going to really raise that cortisol again. And then we continue that spiral down. The solution is to really tackle, one, the reason why we're doing it in the first place, but also, really break this physiological spiral by making sure that we are properly fueled. And as a non-food first therapist, and by that somebody that doesn't, the all-in approach is fantastic. It's brilliant. It, definitely works for a lot of people. But often there are things like trauma, attachment patterns, all sorts of other things that go into create an eating disorder. And I believe that it's really important we look at them. For a lot of people, they don't feel safe changing the food until we really address those either. I don't think like the all-in approach is a one size that fits all at all. However, there is only so long we can really go without really looking at the food and looking at kind of breaking this cycle, because it is a physiological spiral. And until we make sure you're properly fueled, you are going to feel anxious and agitated and going to feel that drive to exercise, particularly if you struggle with that exercise compulsion. And so while people I work with normally balk at the idea that they're going to feel better on more food and less exercise, because they have such a powerful association that's been built up over time through this physiological mechanism that if I keep moving and if I eat less, then I feel in control. And it's need meeting, through meeting our need for safety, etc. as well. But ultimately, we want to find that balance where we can incorporate some movement long term that feels good for our body, that's supportive and actually meets our goals to be healthy. Remembering that our real goal is to, have a healthy body, which means we're properly fueled, which means that we're not damaging our bones, that we have a healthy menstrual cycle if you're premenopausal as a woman, and really setting ourselves up for success to be happy and healthy, not flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. We know that stress has a massive impact on our health. So we want to find that balance where exercise becomes a way to really support our bodies, where we are maybe focusing more on gentle movement like yoga because of the nervous system regulation, like walking because it helps build the bone density that we have, maybe some gentle resistance training, rather than seeing as exercise as a way to earn and burn calories, looking at how we can really use it to support our body and our health. Now, obviously, this is much easier said than done, but it's really important we understand that physiology to really understand the spiral that we're in, so that we can really intentionally then make changes. There's some changes that I often really recommend for clients, and obviously I work really closely with the people that I work with to really support them with these changes, and making one or two changes at a time, to really, alongside doing the root cause work, so that we can really tackle from a top down and bottom up kind of approach to recovery. But things like taking holiday from your step counter is going to do you the world of good, because if we're trying to recover from compulsive exercise, but we have this thing all the time going, oh, it's time to move now, or I haven't done as much as I should be doing. And look at that word that you naturally use, right? I should, I must, I have to go for a walk every day, I have to do this, I need to do these many steps. Even our language around exercise becomes full of these things that tell us that we don't have a way out. So as well as taking a holiday from your step counter, or that being one of the possibilities, looking at your language around exercise, look about how you use those words like I need to, I have to, I should. Those modal verbs really are restricting our brain's neuroplasticity, what we tell ourselves we believe. So if you're telling ourselves, I have to do this every day, even though it really feels like you have to, actually swapping that to I choose to. I don't want to, but I'm choosing to do this today. And it might feel really sticky because obviously eating disorders aren't a choice, but you're giving your brain that idea that things can change, that this is where you're at right now. I can't, I know it's a choice, but it's a choice I'm making right now. And actually gives you the opportunity to, have that neuroplasticity open in the future. Swapping exercise around can be a really useful thing. Like, definitely when we struggle with compulsive exercise and eating disorders, there's often more of a tendency to focus on cardio because of that earn burn kind of strategy, and focusing on things like, as I said, yoga, walking, resistance training, that are going to be less about the calories and more about working with your body and supporting your body, and whilst being mindful of that also becoming a thing, because the body image movement has done a number on resistance training, and we can take anything to the nth extreme as well. But making sure that where you can, these things don't become an everyday thing, and maybe reducing your exercise so that if you're doing it 7 days a week at the moment, looking at doing it 6, and maybe doing, if you feel like that is too much and having a rest day completely on the 7th day is too much, maybe you can put a gentle exercise in. Any ground that we can win back from the eating disorder is good ground, and ground that we need to celebrate. And so just thinking about ways that you can really take that ground back from your eating disorder. Other things that you can do, find more enjoyable ways to exercise, see if you can do a class with a friend. I talk about yoga a lot because it is so regulating for our nervous system. It's all about, the breath and working with the breath. And when we're taking those deep breaths, we're moving more into that parasympathetic nervous system, as well as the postures and all of the strengthening work that we can do within yoga. The power of the breath alone is just so helpful for regulating our nervous system, reducing those stress levels, which is healthy. And that's a really good activity, or if you want to walk away from today with something to do and an activity to do, because we can know all of the information, but if we don't take action, then we're going to stay stuck, right? What does health mean for you? What does a healthy relationship with exercise mean for you? And thinking about how you can reframe your relationship with exercise to support your body rather than push, rather than to punish, rather than to, earn and burn calories. What does a healthy relationship with exercise look for you? And what does health in general look like for you? And how can you make some goals and put some things in place to work closer towards that, rather than the unhealthy, disordered relationship that maybe you currently have with exercise? That's all I have for today. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this. I really hope you do find it helpful. I know that compulsive exercise and exercise in general can be a really tricky part of the cycle to break. So I hope you've got some extra hints and tips to help you make those next stages in your journey.